To wrap up, you have recently published the book, They Call Me Ishmael. It's a novel, but it's also largely based on a true story. So tell us a bit about the book.
Right. Well, it is, as you mentioned, Matt. It's a what they call a roman à clef. It's basically pretty much everything in the book really happened. It's based on true events. It's the story of not only Ishmael, because he's a deserving of a story, but it's also the story of Bougainville. Um, it starts with Ishmael as a 20-year-old man joining the Bougainville Revolutionary Army, and it goes through the crisis and ends on the day before the election in 2020, when we were going to find out whether we had a president backed by an American investor, namely yours truly, or a president backed by China. So that's what the book is all about. It is, like I say, basically based on true events, and it's essentially still happening as we speak.
Yeah, and in the book, you do talk a lot about what you call China creep.
Yes, I mean, China was and is a big threat to Bougainville. And again, the only thing that staves them off right now is Ishmael himself. And Ishmael's reaching out to governments like ours and Australia to try and get some help. But as was asked earlier, is China going away? No, they're not going away. They want that copper and gold, and they want those strategic ports. And it's going to be an ongoing battle. So we're on the front lines, and this is going to be happening all over these island chains, as you folks know.
Yeah, it seems like they're really pretty rapidly moving forward with their plan to take over this part of the Pacific.
Yeah, and they don't need all 10 of these countries to sign on to their development vision. They just need really one or two of them, and they've already kind of got Solomon Islands in the bag, right? And then they've got just one or two of them they built.
PNG is not going to be too far behind.
Yeah, and that's of course a big concern to Australia because of its geography. Although I would say probably any of the nations would be of concern, right? I mean, there's Samoa, which is right next to an American territory, American Samoa, and they've got, going all the way up into Melanesia and Micronesia, Polynesia, all across that whole area, right? I mean, this is theoretically a lot of countries should be concerned, but there's not as much concern or not as much action on that concern as you would think there ought to be.
Well, I think, look, to be fair to these countries, they're poor. They need money, and they need friends. And also, just to be accurate, while the United States was a omnipresent nation in the immediate aftermath of World War II, they basically forgot about the South Pacific and went back to Washington and, focused on other things. And so these countries are susceptible. Furthermore, when you get elected in many of these countries, I would put Papua New Guinea right at the top of the list. I mean, basically, you're thinking yourself, but from the day you get elected, okay, how am I going to make some money out of this? And the Chinese are willing to take advantage of that mindset and the fact that your government controls resources. So PNG is right across the water from Bougainville, and Bougainville is still a political entity of PNG. But unlike in Bougainville, where the landowners control the resources, in PNG, the resources are controlled by the government. So that means that's like a big red sign going off for China. Hey, let's just get to these guys and just pay them off and get control of these mining resources.
Yeah, and I think once you take over PNG or the Solomons, or they have a foothold, and then it's much easier for them to go after other more hesitant or harder to get countries.
Right. I think once you once they actually build that naval base, and they might not call it a naval base, they'll call it a deep water port for which they'll sign a 99-year lease like they did with Sri Lanka. But it'll be a sort of way to project power. So then all those countries are even weaker in the face of that.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest enemy that civilization has in the South Pacific is the mindset that Europe had right before Mr. Putin decided to go into the Ukraine, which is, hey, everything's fine. We're really enjoying ourselves. I mean, gosh, look at this prosperity. Everything's just wonderful here until it's not. And I would say the biggest culprit in committing that mindset right now is Australia. I think Australia would just love to think that things are just going to continue like they have been. Well, they're not. China's on the march, and you've got to pay attention to that drumbeat.
So Australia just elected a new prime minister, Anthony Albanese. Do you think that Albanese understands the dangers of not taking action?
What I've been told, obviously, we have to, down in Bougainville, pay a lot of attention to what's going on in Australia. What I understand is that Mr. Albanese and Mr. Morrison basically kind of think alike about China. The good news is, I think Australia has gone through a wake-up call with respect to China. I mean, look, China, as you guys know, they're down there actually bribing Australian politicians. I mean, everybody knows that, and they've got. I would say they're much more infiltrated in Australia than they are, let's say, in the United States. So I think the new prime minister is aware of that. But I've been to Canberra, and I can tell you the people in, for example, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, again, they've got this, hey, let's not rock the boat strategy. Okay, Solomon Islands, that's our backyard. Hey, what's going on over there? I mean, how could those people do that? Well, come on. I mean, China's been, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Honiara, which is the capital of the Solomon Islands. There's only one way to get there. You have to fly from Port Moresby. You get on a plane and there's 100 people, 85 of them are going to be Chinese. Okay. I mean, Solomon Islands is gone. Okay. So it's just what's going to happen to the rest of the places over there. And Australia, I think, is finally waking up, and hopefully it's not too late.
Well, I hope not. And I hope the U.S. also kind of wakes up and it's a little late for the U.S. to try to restart its embassy, but, could have done that 10 years ago. But, there's an attempt.
At least they're doing it now, I guess.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, John, thanks so much for joining us. And we appreciate your insight into this. And, I hope that everything in Bougainville goes well for the people there.
So do I. Thank you both for your time, and stay in touch.
Thank you.
That was pretty fascinating. I kind of want to go to Bougainville now.
I do. Yeah. Ever since the last podcast we did with Cleo Pascal, I've been thinking I really want to go on a Pacific Islands tour to see all the Chinese investment in these places. And I hadn't really thought about Bougainville until now. And it's like this is a really important place, not only because of its location, but also because it is an example of how you can stand up to the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, it's like in the Solomon Islands, there's
Malaita Province.
Malaita Province. Thank you, because I just forgot the name as I was talking.
And we had Celsus Tefulu on a recent podcast, who's an advisor to the premier of that province, Malaita Province, in the Solomon Islands, which is the one province out of the whole country that is also resisting Chinese Communist Party investment. And that province is really struggling to deal with the politics of they don't want Chinese investment, but the rest of the country does because the corrupt leader of the country really does. And that's kind of like a Bougainville situation, right? Where Papua New Guinea wants the Chinese investment, and Bougainville's like, no, we know it's
But
a bad idea.
Bougainville has more autonomy, at least, right?
Yeah, no, they do have a lot more.
And I hadn't thought about the whole idea of landowners controlling the natural resources on their land being so important, because I think it's something we take for granted here.
Yeah. No, I also like that's such an like if one thing sticks out to me from this podcast, it's that like the value of like giving that power to people, which is like the opposite of communism, right? Like the Chinese Communist Party's whole mentality when they took over in 1949, it's like all of this, they say it belongs to the people, but in practice, it's exactly the opposite, because the only way that they can promise land to the people is by stealing it from the people who own it and taking it for the government with the promise that eventually it will go to the people, which it never does.
You can't own land in China.
No, you're basically leasing it.
You can buy an apartment, or you can buy, but like you cannot.
Like you don't own the land.
You cannot own the land. Yeah.
So like, and this is the case. I mean, this is also the case in communist countries in general, right? Where they rise to power by taking the things that people have. They say they're taking from the rich, but they take from everybody. And then
they redistribute it.
Equally to themselves.
Well, it's interesting because when my parents were growing up in China, and even when I was born in China, you could not even buy an apartment, right? Literally,
right. You have to get it from your work unit. Right?
Yes. So everybody worked for the state, and then your work unit, which is something we don't really have in the U.S., but it would be like your state-owned company that you work for that. You have to get everything from, right? Like your healthcare comes from the state-owned company. For women, the state-owned company tracks your menstrual cycles to make sure you're not having more than one baby, et cetera. Like they also give you a place to live. And then there's a lot of corruption and competition to try to get a better apartment, right? Like, you're like, I need an apartment with 2 bedrooms because I've got 5 people, my parents are living with me or whatever. And then it's just.
Well, so you're saying it's not distributed to each according to need?
There's a lot of corruption. I know you're surprised, China and corruption, but yeah.
Who would have guessed that a communist country would be corrupt?
I mean, I think that's an interesting thing also when it comes to the Pacific Islands, right? That the Chinese Communist Party is not really able to change their model. Like they know how to deal with corrupt officials.
Right.
But when it comes to a place like Bougainville, instead of trying to figure out a way to, fundamentally change their strategy to go with, okay, here's a place where we have to deal with landowners. And they're not interested in being corrupted. Like the government's not interested in being corrupted. How can we work here? They don't have that capacity. Right,
because if you actually want to work with landowners, you have to actually legitimately help the landowners with the things that they need. And that's just not.
That's not what the system is set up for.
Right, exactly. I think this is really, it's been a very interesting insight into how the party operates and how an effective political system can resist that, temptation, that promise of Chinese money, which is ultimately, will bleed them dry.
I mean, I think it's also it's like a little bit of hope that they're not going to just completely take over the entire Pacific.
Yes. And that is what we need now, hope.